My name is Cassandra. I'm with Netlify, and we are essentially your organizers for the evening. The meetup group that is behind this evening as well is called JAMstack. The JAMstack is a modern way of developing websites. So hence the topic of the evening. We are going to have Matt Billman, the CEO of Netlify, come up and just say a few words. Yeah, round of applause as well.
Thanks. So I won't say a lot. For those of you who don't know us, Netlify is a developer tool platform that makes life really easy for any developer that's working with the JAMstack. And we organized this meetup because net neutrality for us as a company is something that's really important. When we started out Netlify a couple of years ago, we were just me and my co-founder, two people, starting to build a developer platform, including a content delivery network, a continuous deployment platform, and we're able to build all that out, and today we have 100,000 developers working with it and using it. And we were able to do this as a very small team because the web is a very equal place where it doesn't really matter if you're in the beginning a two-people shop or if you're a very large company, as long as you could build the right kind of tooling. So the topic of how do we keep the web working that way is really important to us. And I'm really looking forward to this panel tonight and to hear everybody's thoughts on this. Thanks.
So, a couple of reminders. One, thank you, Wade and Wikia, for hosting us this evening. Woohoo! And the fact that you didn't have pizza, which is what we have every single time we come here. But then we got fancy for you this evening. Reminder that if you would like to use a couple hashtags, we encourage you to go on social media and talk about where we are and what we're discussing. There's, of course, the net neutrality hashtag, which is awesome, but JAMstack SF, so JAMstack SF, would be the other hashtag, so I can keep track of all of them and their awesomeness. I think we should just get started. You all look like you're done hearing me talk. So I'm going to introduce Dominic Fracassa. Did I say that right? See? Okay, man. I always mess up names when there's so much pressure. So a round of applause for Dominic, please.
Thank you, everyone. All right. Well, thank you. It is an honor to be here this evening. My name is Dominic Fracassa, and I've written about telecommunications policy and net neutrality for the San Francisco Chronicle. If there's any truth to the adage that knowledge is the currency of the new economy, then surely it would be difficult, if not impossible, to overstate the importance of the internet, that elegant series of tubes connecting us to one another and to the rest of the world, the conduits through which that economy moves. Yet again, in the United States, we find ourselves at an uncomfortable crossroads when it comes to how we decide how we want to regulate this resource, how we ensure the information, that knowledge that flows across those networks does so independent of interested intermediaries, always on the hunt for new ways to extract value from what's become an indispensable utility for so many of us. Presently at the U.S. Federal Communications Commission, it appears that our friends in Washington are poised to undo a set of regulations aimed at ensuring that the internet and its service providers treat all web traffic and application data equally. The rules, according to their champions, many of whom are in this room and around the cradle of innovation here in San Francisco, say that they're crucial. These rules are crucial to preventing ISPs from blocking select services or charging more to efficiently access them. The detractors of that legal regime, led by FCC Chairman himself, Ajit Pai, see the rules as an undue burden thrust upon internet providers, and one that constrains their ability to reinvest in critical infrastructure and service improvements, thwarting whatever innovation it touches. Now, few deny the importance of maintaining an open, free internet, uncorrupted by fast lanes, slow lanes, and throttled speeds. But the debate over the best way to do that has raged in one form or another in newspapers and in courtrooms and everything in between for more than a decade. Making sense of it all and finding a path forward is no easy task, but it's ours here tonight. Luckily, beside me are some of the best people suited for the job. Their CVs are so impressive, it would take all evening to go through them point by point, so if they'll excuse my brevity. Chris Riley, say hello, is head of public policy at Mozilla, who works to advance the open internet and web through public policy analysis, advocacy, strategic planning, coalition building, and community engagement. Prior to joining Mozilla, Chris worked as a program manager at the U.S. Department of State on Internet Freedom and as an attorney advisor at the FCC. Jessica Ashooh is the director of policy at Reddit. Prior to her tenure there, she was deputy director of the Albright-Hadley Middle East Strategy Task Force, focusing on how the United States and its allies could more comprehensively address the growing challenges of state failure and violent extremism in the Middle East. So I'd wager net neutrality will be a walk in the park by comparison. Toni Casserly is an entrepreneur and evangelist for digital currencies and the blockchain industry. She serves as an advisor to several notable companies, funds, and family offices, including but certainly not limited to Singularity University, Factcom, the United Nations, HSBC, Bosch, Cisco, Procter & Gamble, the Institute for the Future, and the St. Gallen Symposium. Dr. Hossein Eslambolchi is a technical advisor at Facebook and the chairman and CEO of 2020 Venture Partners, which focuses on technology and operations consulting to private equity firms and venture capitalists in the areas of telecommunication infrastructure, network intelligence, and information and communications technology. He's also the former global chief technology officer, chief information officer, and chief executive officer of AT&T Labs, and a former president of AT&T Network Operations. And last but certainly not least, Supervisor Mark Farrell, who represents District 2 on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, where he was reelected to his second consecutive term in November of 2014. His legislative priorities include efforts to advance policies addressing housing affordability and the high cost of living in this city, boosting local economic development, and he's also spearheading an effort to bring affordable fiber optic internet service to all San Franciscans. So with that, let us begin. Chris, I'd like to begin with you. If you could, just get us caught up to speed here with where the FCC is in its deliberations over net neutrality. What are the next steps we should all be looking out for, and what is it they're actually poised to do here?
Sure, thank you for that setup. So as you indicated, the Federal Communications Commission, or FCC, adopted net neutrality protections in 2015. This was at least the FCC's third try at going about imposing this kind of protection under the law. The first two failed in the reviewing court, and this one worked. In 2016, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the FCC's rules in a very strongly supportive order, let's say. Then an election happened, and the new FCC decided it didn't like these rules anymore, and so opened a proceeding earlier this year to consider removing them or perhaps replacing them with rules based on a different theory of the agency's authority to get there. So where we stand now, these rules that are in force today have been upheld by the courts, and by all indications are working just fine to protect the internet, are on the chopping block. The proposal that the FCC has released would propose removing them and replacing them with nothing. And there are comments being filed by interested stakeholders. I won't get into too many of the details of the process or you'll all fall asleep on me, but that window is still open. There will be comments filed for the next couple of months. As soon as this fall, the FCC could adopt an order that would undo those rules, perhaps replace them with something else. That will, if the FCC moves forward, inevitably then be challenged by the court. So what we see today as a fight at the FCC will tomorrow be a fight at the courts, and potentially down the road a fight in Congress, all to try to continue and prolong this decade-long adventure.
That's a nice way to put it. Adventure makes it sound pleasant the whole way through. Jessica, you're kind of our representative in some respects from the internet industry. Reddit, along with Mozilla, have certainly not been bashful about supporting the current approach to net neutrality and supporting leaving the rules in place as they are. Could you give us a sense of what the conversations are like inside Reddit right now at your company? How does the company articulate its priorities?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the story that our Netlify CEO told at the very beginning is a story that really resonates with a lot of representatives of enterprise from the internet industry around Silicon Valley. And it's certainly one that we emphasize very much at Reddit when we're talking about this issue with audiences and with lawmakers. Reddit as a platform would not have been able to exist without the open internet. You know, they were two kids in a college dorm room, and they were able to compete and win market share against the biggest companies out there who all had their own websites. You know, the open internet is fundamentally a structure that allows consumers to choose winners and losers based on content. And that's really what's at stake here. Because if the net neutrality rules as they stand go away, then suddenly your cable company, your internet service provider, will be able to curate the internet in a way that we've never seen before. And so it's a bit disingenuous when internet service providers say that we don't need net neutrality because the rules have only existed since 2015. The internet now is very, very different than it was in the early days of the internet, and the temptations now are greater than ever for internet service providers to constrain the internet in ways that simply wouldn't have been possible in the 1990s. The industry is consolidating, and internet service providers are more and more moving into the content creation space, and that puts them in direct competition with websites that we all know and love. And so the temptation now and the market incentives for them are greater than ever, and it's just more and more of an indicator that the consumer really needs these protections in place in order to preserve the innovation engine that is the internet.
Next question for Dr. Eslambolchi. A great deal of ink has been spilled about net neutrality, and I would wager a lot of hot air has been expelled. But considering your deep experience in and contributions to the world of information technology, I want to know what you think is being left out of the conversation that the nation is having right now.
Well, I'm going to say some stuff that probably the FCC will not like, but I'm going to tell you what the reality is. I think the FCC is pretty much delusional, in my opinion. They just don't understand how the internet works, pretty much. And they're trying to kind of put a 2-pound, sand into a 1-pound bag. It just doesn't work. And if you go back to I would say the 80s, when we have the AOL and we have Earthlink and we had hundreds of these dial-up companies, did anybody talk about net neutrality then? What changed that caused people to start thinking about, oh yeah, we got to go change that rule? And I'm not going to talk about what happened, with the Telecom Act of 1934 or Telecom Act of 1996. I mean, it's the different can of worms you can bring into here that makes this problem even more complex than it is right now. But the problem is I don't think the people that are unelected officials, I call them, they really understand how the internet works today. I believe maybe 1% of the people really understand how the internet works today. And back in the 80s or 90s, I would say, yeah, it was a different model. But today, if you think about the way the internet has been designed, is, we pretty much in the past 6 or 7 years, we pretty much rewired the entire internet. And I don't think that's something the FCC or this new guy that is from Verizon, he's a lawyer from Verizon. Of course, he's going to think about Verizon as, trying to control the endpoints. So it's pretty much, not only is being delusional, but at the same time, we've been rewiring that entire internet in the past 6 or 7 years. And the way we've done it is, if you think about the top, I would say 5 or 6 big companies in the internet that accounts for maybe 85% or 80% of the traffic. The way they did that, they built their own private data centers first, and then they said, okay, we're going to put our own router inside of our own data center, and then connect directly over a backbone infrastructure, over the optical network, and then the routing infrastructure into a, let's say, Comcast or a cable company or any type of ISP backbone. And that's called peering, which is pretty much available to everybody. You can peer with anybody you want. So they already have that connection there, and I call that a fast lane or speed lane that they already built already. And then inside of that data center, they also put servers there that connects to the end users where we all use, and that's the whole notion of your caching network, the caching distribution network that we have. or CDN networks. So I think we already are honestly at this fast lane, and this argument that they're making about having a fast lane so I can put your traffic, on a faster lane, or else I won't invest. I don't, to be honest with you, it makes any sense. I mean, there are a lot of other ways you can get around it. And as a matter of fact, you don't even need the fast. You're already fast lane, except for maybe another 20% of the web users. And for them, I think there's a lot of ways you can get around it, to be honest with you. In my opinion, I believe we are talking about a problem. We're trying to create a solution for a problem that doesn't exist. And that's the problem with FCC right now. So we're going to have to figure out what is the problem that we're trying to solve. I haven't seen anybody raising their hand to me as, okay, so help me understand how to solve this net neutrality. I just don't think anybody has done that yet, not the way that I know of. But except, after the new administration, it turns out, okay, this new guy was trying to put this whole notion of net neutrality, and it was called net freedom at in the 2004 with Michael Powell when he was the FCC chairman at the time. So I think, to be honest with you, in my humble opinion, it's just basically we're discussing the wrong thing. There's so much other things that we ought to be discussing around the internet that's compared to talk about this net neutrality. But on the other hand, the ISPs and cable companies for centuries, I would say, has been controlling the endpoints, because that's where they have the access to the customer, whether it's the dial, whether you use a copper, whether it's a fiber, a GPON, XPON, or whatever you want to look at it. And that is basically the biggest problem that everybody will have to face, because access is where you have the highest level of cost, least amount of the bandwidth, and the best ability to differentiate yourself. But because, as was alluded here, that because of all the consolidation that has happened, then I think we have just lost this nature of competition that we used to have. And I think we ought to let the market decide, and market demands what is really actually needed. And I think that is the fallacy that the FCC is not looking at it correctly. But again, it requires all of us to kind of stop focusing on what the problem is and then find a solution, not the other way around.
It does feel like they've been at it for centuries. I would agree with that. Toni, I want to talk about your work with blockchain, the electronic distributed ledger system. Perhaps a word of explanation might be warranted for that. But I feel like it's given you a unique perspective on possible alternatives to the traditional sort of long-standing ways that the internet's been delivered to us for so long. Could you tell me a little bit about that and what you sort of envision as an alternative to this system we've gotten rather used to over the years?
Sure. To go ahead and explain blockchain, the easiest way for me to describe this is blockchain is a distributed ledger with the ability to tokenize data points in a way that redistributes our understanding of ownership models and fundamentally capital infrastructure across our planet. So Mark Zuckerberg recently gave a speech at Harvard saying, "Why do I have $48 billion plus, and there are people in San Francisco who are homeless or don't know what they're going to eat tomorrow." That's not a direct quote, but essentially the reason why he has that much money is because he owns the data. He owns your data as a user. And the blockchain business model essentially takes shareholder capitalism, where the people who have the least amount of money are unable to invest, and inverts an IPO into an ICO, and fundamentally empowers people across the world to take ownership over what is actually creating value in the world. Meaning that, imagine if you joined Facebook and you received Facebook coin, right, when you joined in 2008. And the more valuable that data platform became, that is Facebook, the higher the value of that token would become. So blockchain is essentially empowering a transition from capitalism to protocolism at its core. And it's crazy for me to wake up every day and be in this industry. I firmly believe that in the next 50 years, the entire way we perceive money and even value will be completely redefined. Blockchain, in the same way that the internet changed our perception of information, blockchain is changing our relationship to value, to ownership, and to the distribution of power, fundamentally. So, and I can dive deeper on that if anyone has any questions, but at the core, I think we're all looking at this problem and saying, it's like how I talk about GovTech, right? Every person that has a GovTech idea wants to fund a faster horse. Why are you spending like $300 million building on top of inefficient infrastructure? We have the tools to innovate above and beyond and outside of that space. I think in this situation, we don't need faster horses, we need a car. And blockchain actually enables, through different kinds of, whether it's distributed storage infrastructure, data sharing infrastructure, the ability for us to re-monetize our entire concept of the internet. Imagine if instead of paying for wireless, you were paid to use the internet and to contribute valuable and meaningful content to a server. There are several blockchain companies that are essentially monetizing distributed storage networks to change our conception of cloud computing, Golem, storage, STORJ, and MadeSafe. They essentially use the extra terabytes of RAM, or whether it's computing power or storage space, and they allow you to monetize that empty real estate in a tokenized exchange with other individuals who may want to use that storage space to cryptographically store their files. The other interesting element about this in terms of personal privacy is that when you're storing your files on someone else's computer, it actually breaks your file into several different pieces and stores all of those different pieces on different computers. So if someone wants to hack one of your files, they're not just going to have to hack one computer in the distributed network where it's stored. They're going to have to hack 7 different pieces of that one file just to reassemble the information, and the possibility for you to store, that one piece in different places is extremely, exponentially large. So I do think that with new models of technology and innovation, we actually have the ability, if these rules do get passed, right? We all share the same ideals, I believe, in this room, but if the worst case scenario happens, our best case answer is to build something that flips this system on its head. And I fundamentally believe, I'm personally not the one to build the solution, but look at something like FireChat that used mesh networking to allow protesters in Hong Kong to communicate when the government of China shut down their internet. And I do believe that there is the ability to build and remonetize a system outside of the current infrastructure that actually empowers the individual toward a greater ends of economic liberation and freedom.
Mark, if you wouldn't mind passing the microphone. The concept of net neutrality is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but baked in to the proposal that you've been, getting out in City Hall about the municipal fiber network in San Francisco. I know that it's early stages with that, and that things in government take time, especially projects of this size. But what can you tell us about the project, what your vision is for it, and specifically how net neutrality is conceptualized?
Sure, it's a great question, and thanks for having us here tonight, by the way. So let's talk about San Francisco and how net neutrality affects us as a city. First of all, think about our economy. And our economy now is growing because of our tech industry. And you think about what net neutrality and some of the examples that were given earlier, it's companies that are flourishing. It's a startup economy. Outside of City Hall, I started my career as a lawyer down in Silicon Valley, then an investment banker, and now a venture capitalist outside of City Hall. So being part of the early stage technology industry, this is what helps it flourish. If we killed net neutrality a long time ago, we wouldn't be where we are. And our city is benefiting because of that. But then you also think about our residents and what's happening in DC right now with the FCC. You think about the erosion of consumer privacy laws. You think about net neutrality. This really affects San Francisco residents. And so it's important on so many levels as a city. So the question becomes, all right, I'm on what's essentially our city council, our board of supervisors. But the question becomes, as a San Francisco elected official, and someone who was born and raised here, by the way, what do you do about it? Because you can sit there and bitch and moan about DC all the time, which we do. But the question is, what are you going to do? What are you doing here in San Francisco to combat this? And oh, by the way, we're the technology capital of the world. As we say in San Francisco, we really should be the ones pioneering change in this regard. And so, a number of years ago, I worked with Google, and we brought free Wi-Fi to our city in parks and plazas, and started looking at the numbers. And when you look at it in San Francisco, the thing that really started me down this road, and Jess is here from my office, and Derek from Google, we've been all working together for a number of years on this. You know, we have over, believe it or not today, we have over 100,000 San Francisco residents without internet access at home. Believe that. In this city today, in the city we are sitting in today, over 100,000 San Francisco residents without internet access, and an additional 50,000 with dial-up speed. And it disproportionately affects low-income neighborhoods, disproportionately affects minorities, in San Francisco in particular, the African-American and Hispanic communities. And the thing that gets me, we have 3 small kids at home, 15% of our public school kids don't have internet access at home. And a recent survey we did, we've been doing a lot of work for the last few years, 60% of the kids that were surveyed said at multiple times this year they did not do their homework because they didn't have internet access at home. And we're mandating that they take tests online. You know, we have streaming content that they can't even access at home. How do we expect people to get ahead, let alone stay afloat and compete with the rest of the kids in the world? So the question becomes, what do we do about it? And we've been working for about 3 years. It's getting more and more public. Dominic knows what's going on here. But the solution has to become that, you know, and I'm a free market person, but this is an area where the government has to get involved. And I'm not talking about what the FCC is doing. If we're really going to bridge this digital divide and what ails us in that regard, to me, government has to have a role. And so what we've been working on is a full-blown utility model, fiber to the premise, deployment in San Francisco that will connect every single home, every single business in San Francisco to fiber. And it will include a few tenets that I think are really, really important to, we can talk about it, but I want to throw them out there. First of all, it's a publicly owned asset. I think what we have seen today with market forces, and in San Francisco we have Comcast and AT&T as a kind of, you know, the 2 larger incumbents. We have a number of, you know, insurgent ISPs, if you would call them. They're great, you know, Sonic, a lot of people are doing great work. But we really have 2 main folks. And the current market conditions have led to where we are today. I mean, anyone want to raise their hand and say they're satisfied with their internet access at home? Well, few. Okay. Well, hey, good for you guys. Okay. Okay, you have fiber. Okay. Just so you know, you are this distinct minority in San Francisco. So it has to be publicly owned. It's a dark fiber open access model. So to your point earlier, it has to create competition and facilitate competition. We want people bidding to provide internet access to you and have an open market to be able to do that. And if you think about the ramifications, I mean, we're talking about net neutrality tonight, and it's important that I think, because the federal government fails us and the states continue not to act, and something that the doctor was mentioning, the reality is, why this is happening, the telecom lobby is the 2nd biggest lobby in DC, period. And what you're seeing, 12 different state legislatures in our country have banned municipal broadband, banned it from ever thinking about it taking hold. Thankfully, California is not like that, and I don't think it would ever get passed up in Sacramento. But the reality is we're facing headwinds at the federal and state level, and so it's incumbent upon local areas and jurisdictions, and I think in particular incumbent upon San Francisco, given kind of where we sit in the tech industry and how people look to us, to be the ones not just reacting, but to be proactive about saying, you know, we're going to change the paradigm here. And so we've been going forward with this. We're, you know, the next few months are going to be very pivotal in our project. But think about the possibilities, and more than anything, think about the fact that if we're able to build this, let alone what it means for you as a consumer, for you as businesses, that you will have cheap fiber, essentially, to be able to deploy and do anything you want and innovate off of. But think about the generations of San Francisco kids that we are now going to be putting on a level playing field. These are the kids and the type of people that the government should be working for, and we've been leaving behind because we haven't addressed this issue. But in San Francisco, if we can be the first in the country to do it, again, we're going to have generations of San Francisco kids better off. And also, I think the scariest part to a lot of the telecom industry is if we do it right in San Francisco, this model in every large urban environment, not only in our country, across the world, can be replicated tomorrow. So that's what we're up to.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay, now time for the toss-up round. Whoever would like to chime in, please just grab a microphone. But I want to know, in following and writing about this a little bit, Chairman Pai, the FCC, former commissioner and now chairman, appointed by President Trump, has made no secret about his feelings toward net neutrality when it was being formulated in 2013 and 14, and when it was implemented in 2015. And once he became chairman, he made his views known quite clearly in colorful expressions like I can't wait to take the weed whacker to these regulations, and the days were numbered as soon as it was passed by Tom Wheeler's FCC and the Obama administration. I don't want to diminish things like the day of action, where a lot of people in this room, I'm sure, a lot of people in City Hall were adamant about telling the FCC how they felt about this and what a lack and a vacuum of net neutrality protections would do. So I don't want to take away from that. But my question is, do we need to start thinking about a post-net neutrality country? Do you think that, despite overwhelming letters to the FCC, is Reddit, is Mozilla, is everyone starting to think like Chairman Pai has the votes to do this? He doesn't need to ask anyone's permission. Is it an inevitability? And if so, what do we need to start, if you'll excuse, pivoting toward?
I have a microphone, so I'm going to take the prerogative. One of the things that's really, really disheartening about the issue and how this debate is shaping up from the industry perspective is just how partisan this debate has gotten, particularly in Washington. And it's disheartening because when you look at public polling on this matter, net neutrality and the current rules are wildly popular across the board with voters of all parties, with Trump voters. There's this great poll, I printed it out and brought it with me the other day, last week, by actually a Republican polling firm that found that Trump voters, by a margin of 3-1, support the current net neutrality rules. Now, the key is, though, the phrase net neutrality has become so politically loaded that it's almost a useless term. When you ask people if they support net neutrality, you get about 50% support across the board, which really mirrors the partisan divide in this country. But when you describe the rules and ask people, do you think that this is how the internet should be? Do you think that your ISP should be able to block, certain content? 75 to 80% of people across the partisan divide say no, say that they like the open internet. And so from an industry point of view, our challenge is when we talk about this with politicians, I'm going to be going to Capitol Hill next week with our CEO and co-founder, and we're going to be talking about this issue on the Hill. And we feel at a disadvantage almost because, on the one hand, the Democrats have taken this issue and they're really trying to turn it into a populist issue with which to bludgeon the Republicans in the midterm elections next year. And so that's really kind of frozen things on the Republican side to the degree where they don't even want to engage with us on the issue. And that shuts down conversation that's really bad for internet governance and really bad for us as citizens, because this hyperpartisanship is really preventing needed action and needed cooperation on something that vastly affects all of our experiences, vastly affects our economy. And so, if there's one message and one priority that I would push, it's to find a way to de-link this issue from the partisan politics that are happening in Washington.
I would say, probably honestly, there are two issues that we need to be ready for, which we may or may not be ready right now. One is that you're right, the FCC does have the vote to pass it. There's, that's always been the case. So, and it's going to be but I think the point I'm trying to make is that I think we ought to just move it away, if we can, from the FCC and give it to the Congress. Let the Congress decide on a bipartisanship, not on the way that's been done FCC. Because to be candid with you, if I look at my own experience from learning about the way we design, develop, engineer the largest IP or wireless networks on the planet, I would say, there are so many rules and regulations that the FCC created for us that made it very complicated. And then, it's like we were a separate company, now they're all in one company. The competition instead of going down, instead of going up, it went down. So now the choices, as you said, is a lot less than it was before. And I remember there is a formula that I always thought about this, even when I was in AT&T, and it was basically I call it the 3 I's. These are the innovators. People probably sitting in this room that they know how to design and innovate. then there are people that I would say that were coming in, they will execute, that innovation, which is really what the internet is all about. And then the third is end up to be what I call the idiots. The idiots are the group of people that basically break everything apart. They make it worse than it is right now. And we're just going to have to work with the government to really separate these things apart. It cannot solve this. I mean, this is not like solving a grand unified theory, which is not solvable right now. Nobody can solve it. So I think if you break it down into the chunks, smaller chunks, and educate, the people in D.C., the Congress, the FCC, there may be a chance that this could be reversed and go back to the 2015 model that we had, which is the right model in my mind anyway. But, these local companies, the ISPs, I mean, they're always going to make their own rules because they have thousands of lobbyists in D.C. spending money trying to protect their own turf. And this whole notion, the way they handled the Netflix, as you remember, with slowing down their end traffic, the throttling of the traffic, and the way they did the same thing to the BitTorrent. I think this entire logic of fast lane and the slow lane is just not well understood by everybody. And I think the lawyer trying to make a decision about how the internet works, I think is a wrong decision, in my opinion. You got to let the innovators and the technologists decide and reverse the model rather than the other way around. I mean, you always get dictated by DC in terms of what you should do. Well, what if you change the model a little bit? And it's a different thinking, but honestly, I don't think that the DC is ready for it. I mean, honestly. But it's, we can't just give up. We're just going to continue pushing these guys to say that we need to have a different levels of innovation and not let them throw it. And, be honest with you, my basic and main worry is that if this net neutrality is reversed or just a small, even a modification, because they want to put it under Title II, which is pretty much means that you're going to start controlling it versus the Title I. I mean, think about this. You're trying to, you're one of these ISPs. I won't name them, of course, but you want to make you want to order a pizza, okay, from Domino's. And guess what? You have special deals you made with your ISPs that they won't let your calls go through to the Domino's. They're going to go to the Papa John, for example. So guess what happens? Well, those calls are going to be all blocked pretty much. And although it's not authorized by the FCC to block any phone calls, but you can get a fast, busy signal. They say, I don't have enough capacity there, therefore I'm going to just basically, and that's been happening hundreds of years, to be honest, 100 years since the invention of telephone. And there's ways that you can, work around it. And the worst part of it, which what worries me more than even this example of pizza example, is that if one of these ISPs start buying that pizza company, it gets even worse. And remember what's happening today. Like NFL today, NFL and Verizon, they're saying that, look, if you buy services from me as as Verizon customer, if you're trying to stream, any football games, I'm not going to count it against your data service. That's what they're saying right now. AT&T, on the other hand, because they bought the DirecTV, they're saying that, look, if you are a wireless customer of ours, then any data that you're going to stream that comes the content off of my DirecTV service, for example, the content that they have, I'm not going to count it against your 10 gigabyte or 20 gigabyte of service you pay for. Well, honestly, it's just like an antitrust issue, in my opinion. It's just not free. I mean, you're just removing this entire nature of being free market in here. Let the market decide how this entire model and the ecosystem that we work so hard at, which is 40 plus years, has to get re-engineered. And I don't believe that the DC has the capacity to do it, but the people in this room and in Silicon Valley, as you alluded, Toni, is just the center of the universe in terms of technology. And there's also, honestly, a lot of innovation in the eastern part of the country, or in Europe, in Asia Pacific, in Latin America, I mean, everywhere across the globe. Why don't you use that resource in terms of creating that ecosystem and reverse the engineering and not make it into like an advertising model that it is today? So there are different ways you can make money off of this internet, but I think the way it's been looked at it, the innovators, the big companies, and again, I advise Facebook, but I want to stay away from it. I'm not talking on behalf of Facebook whatsoever. People always take the easy road, to be honest with you. They're not taking the hard road. And there are different ways to make money. Now, people want us to make money out of a content. And I've been looking at this model for almost like 50 years, and I'm saying, wait a minute, you get content. What is the margin in the content you have? There's not much margin in the content, to be honest with you. If you look at the production cost of how you create the content, the margin is small, but everybody believes that they have to create this new content, and then you get this Netflix model that you have in there, which I don't think even you need the Netflix type model. There's a different ways to do it, which is much cheaper. So I think you need to have this type of innovation, in my humble opinion, that you really need to put together as a system to make the internet work differently than it does today.
Sure. So, Dominic, your question was, are we preparing for a post-net neutrality world? I'm not. I'm not, in large part because I think we're going to win. But let me give a couple more pieces of that. I'm going to be both more optimistic and more pessimistic, I think, at the same time. This has been a partisan issue and a political power fight of epic proportions for several years now. I don't think that part of it's going to change in the United States. Despite the fact that we have these great polls out now, we had great polls before saying there is bipartisan support for net neutrality outside the Beltway. I don't think anything that we can do is going to make Chairman Pai decide that he suddenly supports Title II and net neutrality in the way that things are right now. But as I outlined in the beginning, this does not end with the FCC. There is a path ahead of this. And I feel like we have the resources that we need. But there's more layers than that, right? Net neutrality as a concept is widely accepted. The playing field that we're fighting on now at the political level is actually different than it was several years ago. Now you see the opponents of the current rules bending over backwards sometimes to try to explain how much they love net neutrality. That did not happen years ago. That's where we have shifted this conversation because of the millions and millions of voices engaging, because of the professionals and the businesses and the news media and others who have been covering this and telling all the sides of this for so many years. So now it's a fight over Title II and government authority and a whole bunch of other wonky things that we've already had the legal and the technical versions of these fights. It's just a slightly different playing field for the politics. I think if we do somehow get to the place where I would rather not be a year from now, these rules have been struck down and we haven't found another way to bring them back, what we're going to find is that the U.S. has fallen behind the rest of the world because the rest of the world has net neutrality law. And so in the rest of the world, we will see innovators who come up who don't face this gatekeeper pressure from local network operators anymore. And then we will realize, oh, wait a minute, those were actually useful. And then we'll find a way to put them back then.
You mentioned something, and for the whole panel, of course. I saw in my feeds this week and prior to that these efforts by, I'm happy to name them, Comcast and AT&T and the like, who were saying Title II does not equal net neutrality. And I know perhaps in a purely logical sense it doesn't have to, but I think my question is, what do we make of that? And what do we make of the, as you said, the apparent bending over backwards in order to, appease what is clearly, not a consensus, but a great deal of, affirmation that these rules are important among the general population. And even an archaic and esoteric thing like net neutrality is enough for Comcast to buy 10 days worth of Twitter ads and more. And the statements that they say, when you ask them, what do you think about it? It's, of course, we're always going to support an open internet, and you're going to have to trust us to do that. So I'd like to get to that's it. I mean, I'd like to get to two things. One is, what do we make of those statements? And two, assuming that that net neutrality proponents do prevail, whether it's in the courts and whether it's down the line past whatever the FCC decides to do, in the interim, how do we hold these companies accountable? If they say they're not going to throttle, how is the average person with a Comcast Wi-Fi router in their house, if they think it's important, how do they and any watchdog group or et cetera hold these companies to that?
Well, I think basically this has a long history, but, the way the 1934 Act of Telecom, the way they wrote it during the Franklin D. Roosevelt time, it was pretty much focused on wire and cable. That's basically the way they wrote it. And the cable, what they're talking about at the 1934 timeframe, was not the coaxial cable that we have today. it was pretty much was called like an L4 and L5 cable, which is pretty much a lead-based cable infrastructure. But since then, we now replace it with a coaxial cable. So what the Title I and Title II pretty much says is that on the Title I, you got the voice services. So the voice is a mess in terms of the rules and regulations that you really have to follow. And if you think about this, there are millions of pages of document that you really need to understand how you route a call from New York to San Francisco. You have one level of pricing that the FCC allows you to charge the customer. And then if you make a call between, let's say, 200 miles between Dallas and Houston, which is only 200 miles, by the way, the charges are different because you know it's called intra-ladder calls. So that's pretty much wireline model. The Title II says, okay, forget about everything else. We're just going to make this internet, which is a broadband access now, remember. Now it's changed model. We're going to make that equivalent to the Title I, which is pretty much a wireline model, which means now I'm going to put a lot more rules on you that I didn't have before. Now, to the Dominic's point, to be honest with you, yes, you do need some sort of control that these ISPs do not, kind of take more control than what they already have. Remember, as they consolidate more, they get more power. I mean, we've seen that in the airline industry, as you see probably right now. I mean, the oil price used to be $100, and
Use the microphone, Doctor.
Yeah, 5 years ago, if you look at 5-6 years ago, we had a lot of airlines out there, and the price of oil was about $100, and you can go from east coast to west coast about $100, $200. Now, you want to go between New York and San Francisco with 2 or 3 airlines, which they're probably going to have a lot of overfill, but they charge you $700, $800, and then you're going to say, why? Why is it that you're charging me more? Because there's less competition out there, to be honest with you. That's the main reason, and that's exactly what FCC wants to do. They want to create less competition under the FCC Title II so they can create more rules and they can make more money. That's the bottom line.
So a summary version, Title I and Title II are different sections of legal authority that the Federal Communications Commission can act under. They have a very, very long history. Absolutely. They're very complicated. For purposes of this conversation, the FCC tried to adopt net neutrality rules twice under Title I. The court struck them down both times because Title I was insufficient. And they upheld it when the rules were adopted under Title II.
These are the mechanisms through
And
which...
just to add to that, I mean, the fundamental question regarding Title II is, do we consider internet service providers utilities or not? If we consider them utilities, then they're what we call common carriers, like your phone. So your phone company can't say, we're only going to let you call certain numbers. They have to let you call all numbers equally. And so that under Title II is applied to the internet, and therefore it's a common carrier, it's a dumb tube. Everything that goes in has to be, you have to be allowed to access it equally. If we take away the Title II protections, then that rule goes away. That's what it is. So it's utility versus not a utility.
Dominic, you asked about what do we make of it today. I will tell you, this morning I actually had one of these big ISPs in my office trying to explain to me rationally their position on net neutrality. And to me, they're coming out and saying, we're for net neutrality, but we don't like Title II. It's just a clever gimmick that their lawyers and their marketing people are saying, you know what, you can phrase it this way publicly, but we're going to get at the same end game. We're going to destroy what's currently the rules. And so I think it's a joke. I think it allows them to point to say publicly again, while they have pictures of their CEOs right next to Donald Trump, yucking it up on roundtables. They can still say that they're for net neutrality and we're with the common folk. And I think it's a complete load of BS. And I don't know about anybody here. I am sick of the inaction and the partisanship in DC. I don't care if it's net neutrality or this discussion. You look at it right now with healthcare. I mean, my view, and thank goodness we have Mozilla and other organizations that are advocating and doing effective work at the national level. But we have people, to me, DC is getting more and more partisan all the time. I mean, you see within the Republican Party, they can't even agree on what an Obamacare repeal looks like. I mean, it's that partisan within the own parties. And so, to me, again, what we're thinking about here in San Francisco is, you know what? Forget all those people. Forget that. We're going to do it our own way here in San Francisco. And it's not the right model, it's not the right environment for every jurisdiction, but I would say in San Francisco, what's unique about us is that we have rooms like this, and we have an electorate that is willing to be first in the country on a lot of issues, that is willing to be progressive on a lot of issues, and is willing to lead the country on a lot of issues. And to me, as we sit here, and I think everyone will buy into it, There is not one more important issue than this issue that we're talking about tonight, as it reflects so many people. And that, to me, is the answer that we're looking at in San Francisco, is a little bit, like the major league guy, who, F you, Joe Boo, I'll do it myself. It's saying, you know what, forget you, DC. We're going to do it here in San Francisco ourselves.
What about that accountability component of it? Oh, I'm sorry, Toni, if you want to, go ahead.
So, there's a lot of talk about free market competition, and I think we all kind of reach this consensus about the need for open marketplace innovation to really grow. I'm not sure if anyone knows what the Peace Treaty of Westphalia is. It was established in 1649. It essentially established the global oligopoly on governance. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. All of us are sitting here talking about working through oligopic infrastructure built to inhibit free market innovation to preserve a bottom line. And that's exactly it. Essentially, the Peace Treaty of Westphalia eliminated what was formerly city-state governance and established the oligopoly that we have now. I take the activists' perspective on this issue. If we really want to create change, it's going to take all of us. And where all of our voices have power is not under the leadership of someone who is working merely for the self-interest of their private organization. It is going to take all of us to rise up not only with our voice. While that is valuable, don't stop doing that. Don't stop calling, don't stop writing in if you're doing that. That is so important, and it really can make a difference, because that is how all of the amazing people who are sitting on this panel have the ability to say, look, this is what people are really saying. This is what they believe in. Don't stop doing that. But at the end of the day, if you really want to do something, if you really want to rise up, if you really want to create change, you have to take your own agency as an individual into your hands and do something about it, build something better. Because we are all working through insanely oppressive infrastructures when I think at the end of the day, it's not just our job, it's our responsibility and our duty to out-innovate them and build something better. And I guarantee you there are people in this room who can absolutely do that.
But before we change gears, I do want to get to the accountability element
But
here.
I wanted to address the accountability.
Okay,
I think that's a great question, actually, in terms of, well, who do you want to have control? First of all, you want to have some regulation, to be very honest with you. In my humble opinion, I think you need some regulations on net neutrality, but not the way that they defined it, because you can't let these ISPs just have no regulations. Otherwise, they're going to throttle the traffic, and nobody knows about what they're doing. So you need some regulation. The question is, how do you enforce that regulation, right? So that's one thing that we need to really think about, and I don't believe they have yet, we have yet been able to answer that. Now, there was an organization inside of the United States that was called ICANN. That was run by a guy that was assigned by President Obama. His name was Rod Beckstrom, and he did a great job, and it was basically was appointed by the president every 3 years. But because of what happened, I would say during the Obama years, the whole notion of ICANN pretty much went away. And I'm saying that if there was any organization where they tried to give it to United Nations, I said, wait a minute, that's not the organization to do the ICANN. They don't even understand the IP, let alone managing the ICANN, which was a numbering. The ICANN is a numbering. So you create the numbering system, the autonomous systems on the internet. You create the type of service you have on the internet, how you get from IPv4v6. So, and they put all the .xxx stuff that they used to do. So if we had an ICANN back, there would be probably pretty good accountability. And the way you can measure it pretty much, in the packet world, there are 3 major parameters you need to measure, okay? It's a packet loss, you had, loss or latency and jitter. That's all you need. And if you can put a program in place that you can measure the traffic that comes in, whether it's an upload or download, although we're becoming much more symmetrical in this world, then I think this problem from an accountability perspective is going to get solved. But right now, there is no problem. There is no way you can solve this problem.
So I wouldn't.
Nobody can solve it. How do you solve it?
I wouldn't look at today's ICANN, which is still around, to be involved in this. It's never had any sort of direct governance oversight. I'm definitely supportive of tools that allow us to measure our internet experience and allow us as individual users to run apps and clients and services like Measurement Lab that allow us to get a little bit of information about what's going on in our experience. But again, in an environment, as we've all talked about, where there's so little competition, there's very little that we can do from that perspective as sort of a market participant to move with our feet, unless, of course, we happen to live in San Francisco and end up with fiber connected to our homes, which would certainly be nice. Can you get that out to Walnut Creek? You probably don't really have that reach, do you? I do think that the Day of Action is the illustration of what we can all do as individual people, right? We live in a country where our voices do matter. And this actually goes back a bit for Mozilla to why I have a job, to be honest. Why Mozilla has a public policy team is in large part because we looked at what was happening with SOPA-PIPA in the United States Congress. SOPA-PIPA is two laws, actually, that were related to how the ICANN, in fact, has some flavor in this as well, how the domain name system could be used, or better to say abused, I think, to deal with copyright piracy problems. And these bills were in the United States Congress, and all of the political insiders said, these are going to go through. The copyright lobby has too much power. There's nothing that we can do to stop them. And the internet community rallied together, and at Mozilla, we threw everything we could into this, and our executives bought into it and believed it, and we stopped those bills. We stopped this bad idea that was being pushed by another set of political power forces, people who didn't understand how the internet worked or how this technology worked. We're trying to ram this through, and we came together and we stopped it. And Mozilla and many other companies, big and small, in this part of the country said, oh, hey, that's important. A couple years later, they post a job opening. I end up at Mozilla. Anyway, that part of the story I don't need to tell you all. But I do think that our voices make a big difference here. And you're going to read articles about millions and millions of comments. A line I gave at a panel similar to this one a few weeks ago was, sure, we have 7 million comments. Well, you know, that's 300 million people who haven't commented, right? Like, there's more that we can do to make this a headline issue, to make this an important issue. And that's, I think, the only way that we get accountability out of our political system on something like this.
I think we still haven't answered the accountability, to be honest with you. I mean, if you expect, I mean, just my opinion, if you expect that every individual is going to be accountable for what these, ISPs are going to do to their download or upload speeds, to be very candid with you, I think we're kidding ourselves, because that ain't going to happen.
I don't think that's what accountability means, though.
If you have rules, if you have some sort of tools that will allow a consumers or a business to do that, yes, absolutely. But I said, well, where are the tools out there right now? There is none that I know of. Because those tools honestly get controlled by the ISPs at their end. So how do you move that tools directly from the data center directly out to the end state? So unless you make an edge cloud, I'm not trying to become technical here, but unless you make an edge cloud and you put that tool into edge cloud close to the customer, then yes, you can probably define that. But I don't think we haven't yet answered this governance that Dominic asked, in my humble opinion, yet. I think it's just a fallacy to assume that everybody's going to go. I mean, I look at the internet today. I mean, you talked about internet. A lot of people right now, from an educational perspective, they do not yet know how to set up the parameters inside of their either Internet Explorer or even Mozilla or other browser that are out there, in terms of what are the encryption that I need to set up, SSL or whatever I have to do inside of this. There's a certain rule, there's certain parameter features you have to set into the IE or into the browser. I don't think people have that level of sophistication to do it. I mean, I think you have it because you built the Mozilla, so you have that experience. But if you expect to have everybody have that level of experience, honestly, I think that is not the way to do it. But if you think they do, they do. I mean, I'm not going to argue against it. I think that is the wrong way to go.
So quickly, we have a lot of smart people in the audience as well who might have questions. If anyone does, we can send a microphone your way. He was first. Here. Oh.
Well, thank you. My name is Kavi. I have a question for the panel, but I need to tell you where this question is coming from. Primarily, I'm against net neutrality. I believe it is stopping innovation. It is going to be harmful to providing the services to the population at large. And let me just outline my premise, my view, and then I want to open it up to you, and you provide your input on this. If I want to build a network, Dr. Eslambolchi said it very right. Packet drop, jitter, and round-trip delay. These are the three things we use to design a network, nothing more. Now, let me bring you back into a service level. If I want to design a network based on these three parameters for a email services that I'm going to be offering, it's going to be vastly different. The jitter doesn't matter. The round-trip delay doesn't matter. Packet drop doesn't matter. I can design a network, implement a network, and build it into the entire global network, which has nothing to do, and it's going to be very simplified and all of that. I want to take you from this application to the next one. Pandora, 128 kilobits per second. You get the best quality audio, quality of sound coming into your whatever device, right? For 128 kilobits per second, I'm going to design the jitter is going to be a little bit of problem. The round-trip delay, a little bit of problem. Packet drop is a problem because you don't want to have, a static and all of that on the quality of the sound. So I'm going to design it differently. So I have to be careful about that network.
We got to get to the question.
I'm going to take you to the video on demand. Video on demand in a HTTP, you are talking about 78 megabits per second to 4K, 15, 16 megabits per second, right? It's going to be a vastly different network that I have to design. So why and how should I design a network and provide services at a cost level that all these three services are going to be carried on it? And my key question is the following: should I not be charging every one of these service providers for what they're putting into the network, not the connection, but what they're putting into the transport of this network from point A to point Z? So why not providing these differentiated services? And I'm really totally lost in the space of the people who are pro net neutrality.
So two-part quick, this is on. So two-part quick response to that. First, the internet is a general purpose network that's used for all of those services and many, many, many more. And if we ever fall into a place where we are engineering it to serve the needs of a certain fixed set of today's use cases, we've broken the internet, because the power of it is in its generability, its ability to support future innovations and future things that we haven't even dreamed of yet. Second, I would beg to differ that packet loss, jitter, latency, round-trip transmission time are the only things that the internet is being built for. I wrote a white paper in 2009 now that was called Deep Packet Inspection, the End of the Internet as we Know It, ? A little tongue-in-cheek, but the reality is the ISPs who are designing these networks, and in particular the last mile portion of the connection between the last router or switch and the client's home, they are doing a lot more than just that. They are also looking for ways to suck information out of that portion of the pipeline in order to expand into things that invade our privacy rights. They are looking for ways to fine-tune, to slow down and speed up services that have nothing to do with the quality of service of that service, but into how they can find new ways to extract revenue out of it. Like, the math is different now than it was. The fundamentals of the network engineering, absolutely exactly the same. But that's not the playing field that we're talking about anymore.
We just don't have time. We'll have to leave it at that. There was a question right here on the second row. She had her hand.
Hi, so I'm a tech attorney that's spent a lot of time focusing on policy, and so I was curious whether you guys, in an ideal universe, would prevent ISPs from creating content and using anti-monopoly laws to do that.
Preventing them from making content.
Preventing them from making content, or purchasing something like DirecTV, or creating that monopoly, essentially. Would you use anti-monopoly laws to prevent those situations from happening in the first place?
Go ahead, Jessica.
I'm not a lawyer, but from a policy point of view, I don't think that there's any reason to regulate to that level and prevent them from doing things. What we need to prevent them from doing is acting monopolistically. So just creating content is absolutely fine. But the moment that they use their competitive advantage to disadvantage people who are in that same space, then that becomes a problem, and you can look at antitrust law. So I don't think that antitrust law actually is entirely applicable in the net neutrality case for a whole host of boring technical reasons that I won't get into.
Is there other hands? Right.
I'm honest, I really wanted to get the view.
Oh, I know, we've got to.
On
Plenty of time
Netlify's
afterward.
site, as well as the hashtag JAMstack, everyone's tags are available. So if there's further comment that we'd like to make, since we're doing one question, one answer, then we can absolutely do it on there and take the next question.
Hi, yeah, I participated in the National Day of Action, and I also left comments previously. It feels a little bit anticlimactic, especially, with my limited knowledge of the way the political system is working. I'm just a beginning engineer. So, but I'm wondering, as consumers, how can we vote with our dollars? Because it seems to me that the politicians in Washington are not listening. But what I know that people do listen to is where we spend our money, where we send our web traffic. How can we strategically fight back in that sense? Because their whole business depends on us as consumers. And I guess it's a twofold question, because it's how can we do that just as a basic consumer, but also, I have a year's worth of experience studying web development, and I just got my first job in tech. So as an engineer just starting out, also, how can I vote? I mean, how can I use my power of my technical skills? Because these industries also rely intellectual labor. And so I want to know where I can be using those powers that I have as a consumer and as a tech worker to fight back against these larger corporations.
So in my mind, I think it's not necessarily, I'm sure that there are people here who could give you a host of different organizations that you can contribute or movements where you can get involved, but I really think, especially because you are, even though you're a young engineer, you're a female engineer. And I really think that you start creating something on your own. Is my one thing. There's so many places that you can contribute, and I'm certainly not trying to dissuade you from that, because your contributions would be so valuable anywhere if you were willing to give your time and your energy and your knowledge voluntarily. That's amazing. But I think at the end of the day, it's a beautiful thing, the process of creation. So for you to really sit down and say, let me think about these problems with, the depth that I can, and maybe I learn about how to build my own thing from participating or contributing to these other movements or systems, but the power is in your hands, really, at the end of the day. And does anyone else want to respond to this or have anything to say? Yeah.
I'm going to be totally Pollyanna about this, but your voice actually really does matter. And we sometimes get intimidated by large corporations with large lobbying budgets, but they have a dollar, but you have a vote. And the vote at the end of the day is what matters for the politicians. And they do listen. Anyone who has worked on Capitol Hill in a staff capacity knows that there's a very regimented process by which staffers collect phone calls, inform at the end of the day how many phone calls they got for or against a certain issue. And especially in the House, that matters. These decisions, these elections are often, decided by margins of thousands, sometimes hundreds of votes. So it really, really does matter. And, just for our democracy, I never want to get in a situation where people give up. And like I said, we're going to Washington in a corporate capacity next week, and one of the great things that we did for Reddit's participation in the Day of Action is our co-founder, Alexis Ohanian, he made a blog post in which he asked Redditors to tell why net neutrality mattered to them from whatever perspective they came from, and also at the bottom of that entry to tell us who their elected representatives are. And so we're going to be collecting those stories and curating them to the people that we're meeting with so that we can say, here are very personal stories from people in your district, and this matters to them. And, every day of the week, a senator or a congressperson is going to value that voice over a faceless corporation.
Any other questions from the audience?
Okay, so this one's sort of directed toward Mark Farrell. I was wondering, how do we get straightforward laws that actually get things done? So
You're not talking about just the internet now, huh?
No. So AT&T tried to build fiber to the neighborhood many years ago. They failed in San Francisco. Monkey Brains tried to build fiber into San Francisco several years ago. And yet, a few months ago, I just saw Mark Farrell vote to continue to abuse CEQA to force people to do negotiations instead of actually getting things done. So, I was wondering, how do you get straightforward things, get things done?
In the context of net neutrality or the municipal fiber?
In context of municipal fiber, too.
Sure. I mean, again, seems like you have an issue you want to talk about. We can focus offline. Great question. Generically, I think about government overall for sure. I would just say locally here in San Francisco, we have embarked on for the last year a whole host of policies that we have pushed through City Hall, and a number that we're about to introduce for the remainder of this year that is going to help fiber build out. To be quite frank with you, whether it be the government doing it or the private sector doing it. Ultimately, again, I've articulated my thoughts that ultimately, especially on the digital divide question, government has to get involved because you create demand-based models, or you facilitate demand-based models, they're never going to reach the lowest income people in our country, in our city in San Francisco. It's just not going to happen. And from my point of view, that should be part of government's central role, is to actually advocate for those people and to get them onto a level playing field. So I will never shy away from that. But some of the things, for instance, that we did, we pushed in December, was voted on unanimously, introduced a bill for MDU access, so multi-dwelling unit buildings in San Francisco, a tenant's rights bill that said any tenant in San Francisco that requests a different ISP, now by law, the landlord has to allow that ISP to use the existing inside wiring of that building to provide access for that tenant. Well, guess what? The FCC now has brought that up on a notice of inquiry with our current FCC chairman, and they're going through, potentially rulemaking is next. But we need to do everything we can here locally, both from advocating a project and all the skunk works that we've been doing for a number of years here, but legislatively to make these projects possible and to advocate hard. The broader question, how do we have effective laws? I mean, we could be here for hours talking about it. And if you have a different question about CEQA, I'm happy to talk with you about any specific vote. But what I would say is it's incumbent, these projects don't happen just by snapping your fingers. Right? It takes years of advocacy work. I was in the West Wing a lot last year, working with a lot of different teams. We have to work on this, but part of it is clear policy that will enable and facilitate these types of projects to go through. And while we can't get it done at the federal level, we can get it done here at the local level.
Any other questions for our panelists? One final one? Well, I guess we solved it then. Oh, yeah.
Let me bring you the mic. Let me give you the mic.
I was wondering if any of you could speak about local loop unbundling, and how that might change things, how that might increase the ability for smaller companies to compete, how that would affect.
Fill us in on what that is.
Actually, I was hoping that someone that knows more about this could talk about this.
I can tell you. Look, in the FCC, with the rules that they came up in the 1996, they came up with this so-called unbundled network elements. They called it UNE. And it was during the time in which we had the DSL service, if you remember. That was pretty big, in the industry at the time.
Actually, can I stop you first? Well, can anyone give a quick primer on local loop unbundling?
Okay, well, okay, sure. So the local loop is pretty much the access that you got from the service provider, whether it's a circuit switch node or you have a packet node, which we called it SNRC, which is a simple node routing complex, pretty much, that goes directly into your endpoint, which is your home.
Right, so it's that last
That's
mile.
a local loop, exactly. That's a last mile. And last mile is basically where everything starts and ends. And that is the last mile. That's where you have the highest level of cost, you have the least amount of bandwidth, and you have the best ability to differentiate yourself. That's why I highly support getting to the fiber to the home itself right away, because he has better opportunity than AT&T guys, because the local jurisdictions are different. And plus, it's probably cheaper for him to do it than you get somebody like an AT&T to do it. Why? Because it takes AT&T about $1,000, $1,100 per mile. For him, it may cost you $200 or $300. So it's better for you. Now, let's go back to unbundled network element. The whole issue was, is it possible that when I have my local loop, which comes down to your house itself, is it possible for me to separate my voice from my data? And so you get your voice, you have a local voice, you have a long distance voice, or you can say, look, I'm just going to have pretty much a pipe. You give me a 64 kilobit per second pipe or a 1.5 megabit pipe, which is a T1 pipe. That was probably about, as I said, a decade and a half ago. And can I unbundle them so I can sell you only the local, which you don't need the long distance, so you just use the local services. The problem is that it's a good in concept, and I support it, but the service provider don't support it. That's the problem. So that whole thing fell apart pretty much. Even though the FCC said you got to do it, they didn't do it pretty much. So you end up with a problem, a lot of problems that we are facing today, to be honest with you. And you're going to have to go back. You can go back and ask FCC to change this unbundled network element and stuff, unfortunately. Now, I don't know if I answer your question, but I think if you want to give me a little, I can go to a lot of details on this, but I'd rather not do it in this audience and take you offline. But if you have any specific question, I'll be more than happy to answer your question. And by the way, the unbundled network element is cheaper to do it than it is. But unfortunately, they don't do it for you. They're not going to do it. And I can explain to you hundreds of reasons why. But anyway.
So if you haven't read Susan Crawford's work, she's written a lot about this. She's incredibly brilliant on this topic. International comparison, there are countries where there is the equivalent of this kind of last mile structural unbundling. Most of these countries have also passed net neutrality laws over the past few years because it gets to some parts of the competition angle, doesn't capture everything.
But just a point, UNE has nothing to do with net neutrality. Let me explain this. So just make sure, let's not compare apple and oranges here. You have to compare apple and apple. So that question you asked, which is a great question, has nothing to do with net neutrality. Net neutrality is a term that was coined by a guy called Tim Wu, W-U-U. And nobody even knew what that means, to be honest with you. But they created the idea. So now this is all the debate and all the things that we're going into.
Speaking of debate, let's not further it. Are there any other questions? And you two can take that offline if you want, or bring it to Twitter. Any other questions? Going once, going twice.
For our panel.
Thank you, everyone.
For our moderator.